The massacre they tried to erase from history. Nobody talks about what really happened at Devil's Canyon in 1876. The government buried it. Historians won't touch it. But the descendants of those Apache warriors? They still whisper about the day their ancestors made an entire cavalry unit vanish into the desert, and what they did to send a message that echoed across the entire Southwest. This isn't your sanitized textbook version of the Old West. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about the most brutal conflict between the Apache Nation and the white settlers who thought they could tame them. Spoiler alert, they couldn't. The powder keg ready to explode. By 1876, the Apache had been pushed to their absolute limit. For decades, they'd watched wave after wave of white settlers flood into their ancestral lands like a plague of locusts. These weren't just random wanderers. These were miners, ranchers, and soldiers who acted like the land was theirs for the taking, handed down by some divine right that conveniently ignored the fact that Apache families had lived, hunted, and died on this land for generations beyond counting. The breaking point. An incident so vicious it would make your blood run cold. A group of prospectors stumbled upon an Apache sacred burial ground near what's now the Arizona-New Mexico border. Instead of showing respect, or hell, even basic human decency, they desecrated it. They dug up graves looking for Indian treasure, scattered sacred remains across the desert like trash, and even took skulls as twisted souvenirs to sell in frontier towns. When the Apache discovered what had been done, their war chief, a man the whites called Red Thunder, though his real name was never recorded in white man's history, made a decision that would change everything. No more raids on the fringes, no more warnings. This time they would strike at the heart of the military machine itself. Captain Morrison's fatal arrogance. Enter Captain Benjamin Morrison, a 32-year-old cavalry officer, fresh from glory in the Indian Wars up north. Morrison was everything wrong with the military's approach to the Apache, arrogant, racist, and catastrophically underestimating his enemy. He'd boasted in letters to his wife, which survive to this day, that he would civilize these savages, and that one well-trained cavalry soldier is worth 10 of these primitive warriors. Oh, how wrong he was. Morrison received orders to establish a forward operating base in Devil's Canyon, a narrow gorge that cut through the mountains like a knife wound. Every scout, every tracker, every person with half a brain told him it was a death trap. The canyon had only 2 ways in or out. The walls rose hundreds of feet straight up, and Apache smoke signals had been spotted in the area for weeks. Morrison ignored them all. In his mind, showing fear was weakness, and the Apache would respect strength. So in August 1876, he led 147 soldiers, along with supply wagons and horses, directly into the canyon. They set up camp right in the middle, sitting ducks with nowhere to run. The Tat Spring shut. Red Thunder had been watching. For 3 weeks, Apache scouts had tracked Morrison's unit, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their routines. They knew exactly when the sentries changed. They knew which soldiers drank too much whiskey at night. They knew everything. On the night of August 19th, the Apache made their move, but not the way anyone expected. There was no frontal assault, no war cries in the darkness. Instead, Red Thunder's warriors had spent days carefully placing massive boulders at strategic points on the canyon rim. Just before dawn, they pushed those boulders over the edge. The sound was like thunder, appropriate given Red Thunder's name. Tons of rock crashed down on both ends of the canyon simultaneously, sealing it off completely. The cavalry was trapped with no way out, but the real horror was just beginning. Psychological warfare. Like nothing they'd seen, what happened over the next 3 days became the stuff of nightmares. Red Thunder didn't just want to kill these soldiers, he wanted to break them mentally, to send such a powerful message that the military would think twice before sending more men into Apache territory. The Apache controlled the high ground completely. They didn't need to waste arrows or bullets. They simply waited, occasionally rolling smaller rocks down to keep the soldiers pinned and terrified. The August sun turned the canyon into an oven, reaching temperatures of 115 degrees. The soldiers' water supply ran out by day 2. Men started dying from heat stroke. Others went mad from dehydration. stripping off their uniforms and babbling incoherently. Morrison tried to maintain order, but his authority crumbled as fast as his men's sanity. Some soldiers attempted to climb the canyon walls in desperation. They were picked off easily by Apache arrows. Their bodies were left hanging on the rocks as warnings to others. On the third day, Morrison finally broke. He raised a white flag and begged for terms. Red Thunder's response was chilling. He sent down a single canteen of water tied to Morrison's own regimental flag, now decorated with the scalps of the soldiers who'd tried to escape. The message written in blood. What happened next is disputed by historians, mainly because nobody from Morrison's unit survived to tell the tale coherently. But Apache oral history, passed down through generations, tells a different story than the sanitized military reports. Red Thunder gave Morrison a choice. The soldiers could die of thirst right there in the canyon, or Morrison himself would face Red Thunder in single combat. If Morrison won, the survivors would be allowed to leave. If Red Thunder won, the soldiers would be released, but Morrison's fate would serve as a message. Morrison, desperate and half-mad from dehydration, accepted. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes. Red Thunder, a warrior who'd been fighting since childhood, disarmed Morrison almost immediately and killed him with his own cavalry saber. True to his word, Red Thunder let the surviving soldiers go, all 83 of them who were still alive. But he kept Morrison's body. What happened to it became legend. Morrison's remains were found weeks later, tied to a post at a major crossroads used by settlers, positioned so he was staring west, back toward the settlements. It was a warning. This is what happens when you disrespect us. The cover-up that followed. Here's where it gets really interesting. The U.S. military was so embarrassed by the Devil's Canyon disaster that they actively worked to bury the story. Official records claim Morrison's unit was ambushed by hostile forces and sustained heavy casualties. No mention of the 3-day siege. No mention of the humiliating defeat. No mention of Red Thunder's brutal but effective message. The surviving soldiers were scattered to different units across the frontier, specifically to prevent them from telling a unified story. Some were even threatened with court-martial if they spoke publicly about what really happened. The few newspaper accounts that emerged were quickly discredited as exaggerated frontier tales. But the Apache knew, and more importantly, other tribes knew. Word spread across the Southwest that the Apache had destroyed an entire cavalry unit and made their captain into a warning sign. It emboldened resistance across the region and led to years of intensified conflict. The legacy nobody wants to admit. Devil's Canyon represents everything uncomfortable about the real history of the American West. It shows that the Apache weren't primitive savages waiting to be civilized. They were sophisticated warriors who could outthink and outfight the U.S. military when the conditions were right. It shows that American expansion wasn't inevitable or glorious. It was bloody, brutal, and met with fierce resistance. Most importantly, it shows that history is written by the victors, but that doesn't make it true. Red Thunder was never captured. He disappeared into the mountains and became a ghost story that terrified settlers for another decade. Some say he was killed in a later battle. Others claim he lived to old age and died peacefully, having successfully defended his people's honor. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but one thing's certain. After Devil's Canyon, the U.S. military never again underestimated the Apache, and Captain Morrison became a cautionary tale whispered among soldiers. Respect your enemy or become a warning to others. This is the story they don't teach in schools. This is the real Old West.